Hello, hello, hello. I'm your host, Molly Bloom, and today our producer, Mark Sanchez, is joining me.
Hello, 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 Molly. Today we're going to tackle a question about sneezing.
Why does the heat of the sun provoke sneezing and not the heat of the fire?
Interesting question, right?
Right, but that wasn't from one of our listeners.
Nope, this question was asked over 2,300 years ago.
By Greek philosopher and scientist Aristotle.
Which leads us to Caitlin and Megan from Portland, Oregon.
Hi, I'm Caitlin, and I'm 9 years old.
Hi, I'm Megan, and I'm 7 years old.
Our question is, why does the sun make you sneeze? Whenever I come out from the store, from school, and out to recess, if it's a sunny day and I happen to glance up at the sky, I sneeze.
We don't know why we sneeze when we look up at the sun.
They ask pretty much the same question as Aristotle.
2,300 years later. To find an answer, we turn to Dr. Louis Potocek.
He's a neurologist and human geneticist.
Yeah, he studies the brain and the genes that make up all humans.
So why do we sneeze when we look at the sun?
The bottom line is that nobody knows.
2,300 years later, and still nobody knows.
But Dr. Potocek has looked into the phenomenon. It's called photic sneeze reflex.
You know what reflexes are. When you touch a hot stove accidentally,
Ouch!
Even before we realize that it's hot, we've begun to draw our hand away. There are many reflexes in all animals, but certainly in us humans. And so people speculate that perhaps photic sneeze is an abnormal reflex where a stimulus like bright light somehow leads to activity in the part of the brainstem where the nerves are that cause the sneeze to be initiated.
Normally, sneezing is our body's way of getting an irritant out of our airways.
Let's say you breathe in some dust or mold.
Black pepper is always a good bet.
Take a big whiff of black pepper and it gets caught in the lining on the inside of your nose.
The mucosa.
Our bodies kick into action.
Pepper in the mucosa. Repeat, pepper in the mucosa.
First, the phrenic nerve sends a signal to the brain.
Pepper alert! Pepper alert! Hey, brain, we got a pepper emergency. Don't worry, I got this. Diaphragm, contract.
The brain sends a message back down the phrenic nerve telling your diaphragm,
The muscle beneath your lungs,
to contract and expel air.
which we know as a sneeze.
So photic sneeze reflex triggers a sneeze even when there's no irritant present. Dr. Potocek has been studying photic sneeze reflex over the years. It turns out Caitlin and Megan have their parents to thank for this condition.
About 10% of the entire population has photic sneeze reflex. If someone doesn't and they hear about this, they say, wow, that sounds really funny. If you tell this story to someone who has photic sneeze reflex, they will often say, oh, really? Doesn't everybody do that? Because they do it and some of their family members do it. It doesn't seem to have any benefit as, pulling our hand away from a hot stove would, but it occurs in a large number of people for reasons that are completely unclear.
So we know that sneezing from the sun is probably genetic, but we still don't know why some people are wired to do this. We know that about 10% of people sneeze when exposed to bright light.
Like when you come out of a dark movie theater on a sunny day.
But there's nothing really wrong with an extra sneeze now and then, so there's not much interest in figuring out how to stop this.
But Dr. Potocek thinks that finding the genes that cause photic sneeze reflex could help in treating people with more serious problems.
In some percentage of patients with epilepsy, if some of those patients are exposed to a flashing strobe light, in some cases that can precipitate a seizure. Some of your listeners will have heard about this in Japan, where a particular video game and the flashing movements on the screen was causing some children in Japan to have seizures, for example.
A seizure is when brainwaves get out of their normal rhythm. And when they happen, they usually last for a few minutes.
Now, there's a lot of different ways seizures can be felt in a person's body.
Some people feel nauseous or feel tingling in their bodies. Sometimes they twitch or lose vision. Sometimes a seizure comes on very strong and a person will fall down and start shaking all over.
Some people get seizures because of the way their brains work. Other people can have seizures triggered by outside factors like the video game Dr. Potocek just mentioned.
So there are many different reflex phenomena, some of which are problematic. I mean, having seizures obviously is a much more serious thing to happen than than sneezing. But it is my thought that if we could understand what it is that causes photic sneeze reflex, that it might teach us something about some of these other reflex phenomena.
Some mice and a handful of people are known to have seizures when they hear a loud noise.
Dr. Potachik's lab has been able to isolate and clone the gene that causes these kind of seizures. And in doing that, they might be able to figure out a way to stop those seizures.
The same might be true for seizures brought on by strobe lights. And looking for a gene that causes photic sneeze reflex could be the first step.
To Caitlin and Megan,
and all the photic sneezers out there,
there's no known reason for why you sneeze when you see a bright light.
Maybe you can just think of it as being part of a special club. Kind of a sneeze club.
Now we're diving into a topic that we are very excited about.
Too excited? Maybe? No way. How could you be too excited when it comes to something this incredibly cool? Of course, we are talking about snot, boogers, nose jams, schnoz jelly, whatever you want to call it.
We are really excited because your questions led us to find out that nasal mucus, as it's formally known, is really, really cool. Magical, even.
Our first booger question comes courtesy of Harrison in Lakewood Ranch, Florida.
My question is, how do boogers get in your nose, and why aren't they in other parts of your body?
Very nice, Harrison. A two-part question. First, the source. Boogers come from mucus that's made in your nose, and it's basically superpowered. Dr. Holly Boyer, who's an otolaryngologist at the University of Minnesota, treats patients who have nasal and sinus issues.
I have a lot of experience with nasal mucus.
And it's really important stuff. That mucus does some key things for your body. First, it makes sure the air you breathe in won't hurt your lungs.
It moisturizes the air that you breathe. If you go outside and it's cold and you breathe in through your mouth, it hurts your throat, it hurts your lungs, it kind of burns. But if you breathe through your nose, the air becomes completely humidified. By the time it reaches the back of the nose, it's almost 100% humidified. So the air that reaches your lungs is nice and wet and it doesn't hurt your lungs.
The other thing mucus does is it cleans and filters the air you breathe. And the way it does that is super cool. Your nose is constantly making mucus. It's made by what are called goblet cells in your nose.
The mucus in your nose is a sticky substance. It's made partially of water, actually mostly water, about 95% water. More specifically, it's salt water. And about 5% of it is made of sticky substances like proteins and substances that your body secretes to make it sticky.
And the stickiness is key. It acts as a kind of flypaper that traps nasty things that we don't want to breathe into our lungs.
Viruses, fungus, bacteria, dust, pollens. There are chemicals in there that make it really hostile for bacteria and fungi and viruses to live. So there are chemicals and cells that attack those invaders. There's also antibodies to recognize whether or not it's something good or something bad.
So once these get caught, where do they go? It turns out your nose is an efficient self-cleaning system, basically replacing your nasal mucus every 20 minutes.
So the same cells that line the inside of the nose that secrete the mucus also have little tiny microscopic hairs on them. And it's really interesting that the flow of mucus is pre-programmed. It constantly is being swept into the back of the nose, except for a very small part in the front of your nose, which gets propelled forward, which is in a very convenient place for your fingers to reach it.
These hairs Holly mentioned aren't the ones you can see at the front of your nose. Those hairs are great for filtering out big things like bugs and dirt. The hairs that sweep the mucus back and out of your nose are very, very tiny.
You can only see these with a microscope, and they're constantly moving. And so that sticky mucus that's full of all that bad stuff that it filtered out of the air, you swallow that. And it's fine to swallow it. An interesting fact is that your nose produces 1 to 2 liters of mucus per day. And most of that you don't even notice because it's continually being swept into the back of your nose by those little hairs, and you just swallow it. Good thing about swallowing is that when it goes into your stomach, anything that's alive, like a virus or bacteria or fungus, dies because of the acid content in your stomach. So the acid in your stomach kills all that stuff that your nose so efficiently filtered.
So it's pretty sophisticated. The air you breathe in through your nose goes to your lungs, but the mucus produced by your nose goes into your stomach. Now, like Holly said, most of the mucus is swept back and swallowed, but a small bit at the front is pushed